Hello everyone. So as is pretty obvious, the Hobbit trilogy is one of the worst movie trilogies to ever exist, and most people I've spoken to agree on that. While there are a ton of videos critiquing this trilogy, I haven't made one of my own yet, so I put this little video together to highlight some of my biggest problems with this trilogy so I can prove to you all that they really do suck, and that anyone who says otherwise is probably biased. So I suppose let's jump right into it. Possibly the biggest single issue with this trilogy is with the characters. The characters in this movie trilogy aren't compelling, interesting, or complex in any way whatsoever, and they're so bad that they make the average CW characters look amazing by contrast. Our protagonist, Bilbo, is bland, boring, and he is a completely uninteresting caricature. He doesn't change at all, and once he's done with the adventure, he seems like the exact same person who left. Now, I know Tolkien made Bilbo in the book pretty simplistic, and the movie doesn't really elaborate or expand upon him much. He's not given any time to shine or any scenes that flesh out his character and his relationships with other characters, which really hurts a lot in the long term. It certainly doesn't help that he isn't even really the protagonist of this trilogy. He gets sidelined a lot, and Thorin is the real protagonist of this movie trilogy. I'll get to Thorin in a bit, but first I want to mention the dwarves, because they suck. Despite the very obvious efforts from the filmmakers to give each and every dwarf some character, they actually don't really have any. For one, the aesthetic of these dwarves is really weird and doesn't fit at all with Lord of the Rings. Not a single dwarf actually looks like a dwarf, and it is bizarre how the film focuses on the looks of these characters more than the characters themselves. Characters should always come before looks, and looks are always secondary to characters, so the fact that they focus on these looks more than actually giving them some characterization speaks as to how hollow and shallow these characters actually are. Just like with Bilbo, we don't get any quiet moments with these dwarves where they can discuss their motivations, flesh out their characters, or build their relationships with others, which, just like with Bilbo, really hurts them. It doesn't help that they are very stupid and annoying. They wander into very obvious traps and are generally incompetent, which really hurts the idea that these are hardened warriors going on this quest. They also sing a lot, and all their songs are stupid and suck, so I don't get why the filmmakers included so many. It doesn't help that the dwarves' theme song is constantly played when they're fighting the trolls, or when they're walking again, and it's really frustrating. Now, one of the dwarves does actually get some characterization, Thorin, but, unfortunately, he also sucks. The biggest issue with Thorin is that he is way too young, and he sounds like a very unimportant and very childish individual. To make up for this, he keeps yelling to make himself sound important. Now, this instance on screen here is probably the worst example of this in the entire trilogy. He's just yelling to make himself sound important for literally no reason. Like, we get it, you're important, can you please shut up now? It honestly comes across like Thorin is just a young person trying to get everyone to respect him, so he raises his voice a lot, and it is really embarrassing. Even though Thorin does have years of experience leading his people and forging a new life for them after Smaug took Erebor, he isn't old like he is in the book, his hair isn't gray, and he's not elderly, and this hurts his character so much. Now that we've covered the protagonists, or at the very least the good guys, let's move on to the antagonists, who are also really bad. Shocking. A lot of people I've spoken to tend to praise Smaug either for his cool factor or his looks or for his voice, but he sucks both as a character and as a villain. He's the driving force behind this trilogy, as he's the one who actually took Erebor, and his entire motivation for conquering Erebor is because he likes gold. Really? That's his entire character? Aside from that being incredibly shallow, he also has no further motivations or goals. He's really just not a good villain because of this. He doesn't have any plans for conquest or world domination past getting some gold, and that makes him kind of an underwhelming villain. Compare Smaug to Sauron, who has enormous plans, and you can see why Sauron is such an amazing and compelling villain, while Smaug really isn't. Azog is also really bad, mainly because he's dead by this point. In the book, he died and his head was put on a spike, so it literally wasn't possible for him to be the villain. But for some reason, he was revived for this trilogy. He has a lot of really stupid action scenes, like this dumb scene where Thorin runs across a log to attack him with the Ringwraith music playing in the background. Pretty much everybody has pointed this out as a huge breach in continuity because it doesn't make any sense for this music to be playing here, and it's really embarrassing how the movie is just so blatant in this breaking of continuity. The Lord of the Rings movies never did anything remotely close to this. They didn't reuse music or footage in any ways that broke continuity, so this is especially frustrating. But back to Azog, he also does the really stupid trope of killing his own men. Orcs? Whatever. But it's really stupid. It also sort of goes against what we know about orcs, because they don't really kill their own men for dumb things like this, so I don't know why they did this. Is it to make him intimidating? Because you could have just written him better. I just hate talking about him, and the antagonists and characters in general, so whatever, they suck, let's move on. So, the plot of these movies. Before I get into any criticisms, let me start by summarizing the book. A wizard named Gandalf recruits Bilbo Baggins to go with some dwarves to kill a dragon and reclaim their homeland. They get to the mountain, the dragon blows up a town and then dies, and there's a big fight over the mountain with the good guys winning. If this very short summary seems like a little too little for a movie trilogy, that's because it is. There isn't really much that happens in the book, and this summary perfectly demonstrates that. In fact, I don't even think there's enough for one 3-hour movie. So, how did Peter Jackson solve this issue? Well, by padding out these movies with pointless and absurd action, adding stupid stuff like character development, flashbacks to flesh out the world and history, and constant references or copying of Lord of the Rings. So let's start with the action in these movies, which is abysmal. Nearly all the fights are nonsensical, with crazy, physics-defying feats carried out by the characters on a regular basis. They constantly face unwinnable fights or completely overwhelming odds, but they always get out of it completely fine. Pretty much every single action scene suffers from these issues, and I don't want to get into specifics because if I had to break down each and every one, I would be here for days. The worst action scene is definitely the troll fight, with so much plot armor and so many issues with how the fight actually progresses. Note that I said nearly every scene has these issues, because the barrel scene, by contrast, is amazing, and the chariot scene is pretty great, though it doesn't achieve the same level of perfection. I want to briefly compare the Hobbit action to the action in Lord of the Rings, which is really great. In that trilogy, the characters are pushed to reasonable limits and they never survive anything ridiculous or completely unsurvivable. They don't face overwhelming odds on a regular basis, and the plot armor in those movies is very minimal. I really enjoy the action in Lord of the Rings, and coming from those movies to these movies, I expected the same quality, but I was miserably let down. Another huge issue is the constant references to Lord of the Rings and the blatant copying from those movies. In Unexpected Journey alone, we get a prologue explaining the world, Bilbo smoking pipeweed, an introduction in the Shire, Gandalf using his loud voice, Gandalf bumping his head, the trolls saying they should sit on the dwarves and squash them into jelly, old Toby pipeweed, Rivendell being halfway through the movie, a sequence in the mountain with goblins, a leaving the mountain scene, and eagles. All these are more than just references. These are all instances of literally just taking things from Lord of the Rings and copying them into these movies to make the fans happy. When I watched this trilogy, all these moments and sequences made me really frustrated because I was able to see right through what the movie was trying to do, and I know a lot of people fell for it. Overall, the plot is just really padded and can probably be cut down to like an hour or two maximum, making these movies a really weird experience because nothing really happens, even though a lot of stuff is happening on screen. Now, I briefly want to mention the tone of these movies because it constantly flips from funny and comedic to dark and serious, but not really getting either of them down well. The funny, or the lighthearted bits are really strange and bizarre and aren't really amusing or funny at all, and the more serious scenes aren't even that serious. When compared with other fantasy works like Game of Thrones with violence and swearing and nudity, the Hobbit trilogy is much more childish and it alienates audience because of that. The Hobbit should have stuck to either a lighthearted tone or a more serious tone because you can't really balance both in one story. All in all, these movies are really bad, and even though I didn't have too much time with this video, I hope I covered most of the major points. I'll link some really fantastic videos of this trilogy in the video description, so if you guys want to check those out, I highly recommend them. Thanks for watching everyone, I guess, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.